Ronald Reagan was the 30th president of the United States, an ambitious and charismatic figure unlike any other in American history. He was a dominant force in national politics for a quarter of a century. Reagan's legacy remains one of the most powerful and controversial in politics. He is often regarded as one of the most influential in US presidents, particularly for his role in the Cold War, economic policy, and the shaping of American conservatism. He is the only president to be both idealized by some and deeply criticized by others. Today we explore a thorny path to the White House taken by American last cowboy, Ronald Reagan. Born in Topeka, Illinois, Reagan was the second child of Jack and Nell Reagan. Both parents were deeply religious. Ronald's mother was a charity worker and his father worked mainly as a shoe salesman and suffered from alcoholism. As Reagan's father had no steady employment, the family moved frequently and was very poor. However, Ronald claimed to have had a happy childhood.
No one who didn't go through the Depression can ever visualize what it was like. 26% unemployment nationwide.
Once young Reagan found his father unconscious and drunk on the porch of their house and had to carry him inside by himself. But he rarely talked about the emotional toll of this experience. Most of his upbringing was shaped by his mother. The optimism for which Ronald Reagan became famous was achieved at great cost and by deliberately ignoring the turmoil and inner anguish that surrounded him. Nell Reagan's strong religious beliefs created an environment of constant moralizing, shaping Ronald's view of life in terms of right and wrong. A delusioned actress, she channeled her artistic ambitions into producing religious plays and dramas. She encouraged young Ronald to participate, giving him the first taste of public speaking.
She was probably the kindest human being I've ever known.
After graduating from high school, Reagan's parents sent him to Eureka College, a small school with a strong Christian foundation. Reagan was a mediocre student with a C average, but this was enough to allow him to participate in extracurricular activities, which he loved. He flourished outside the classroom, playing football, acting in the drama club, and serving as the president of the student council.
I had two great interests in my education, in addition to getting an education, and they were athletics, playing in the athletic teams, and being in the entertainments, in the class plays, in the drama club plays, and so forth.
In 1928, during Reagan's freshman year, the college decided to cut faculty salaries and eliminate student programs. This sparked a student uprising and placed Ronald in the midst of his first real political moment. Reagan gave his first public speech, passionately defending the students' protesters. His words were compelling, calling to fairness and integrity from the administration. Reagan was discovering his ability to move an audience. When Reagan graduated from Eureka College in 1932, the Great Depression was ravaging America. He initially sought work in Chicago, then the National Broadcasting Center, but was unable to secure a position. Ronald finally appealed to the WOC, where he was given an audition as a sports announcer. Initially, he was only allowed to cover University of Iowa football games, earning just $35. Reagan's first major task at WOC was to recreate baseball games for the radio audience based on only telegraph updates. The station had no live broadcasts from the stadium, so Reagan had to create a play-by-play commentary with minimal information. This experience honed his ability to think on his feet and keep the audience engaged even when the telegraph failed, forcing him to invent details of the game. Reagan added exciting descriptions to make his commentary feel like he was experiencing the game live. He quickly adapted to the changing rules of radio broadcasting, moving away from the dominant hectoring style of early radio announcers, which was authoritative and fast-paced. Instead, he developed a relaxed and engaging style that made him more accessible to listeners. By the 1936, he was making good money broadcasting Cubs games, which were heard by virtually everyone in the Midwest. Tall and handsome, with a rich speaking voice, Ronald Reagan had the looks and charm of a Hollywood star. He fell in love with acting as a teenager. In 1937, he traveled to California to cover spring training for Chicago Cubs and met a Hollywood agent. Coincidentally, Warner Brothers was looking for a new actor to replace a promising young star who had committed suicide, and Reagan vaguely resembled him. They auditioned and the studio immediately signed him to a contract $200 a week, a staggering sum at the time. Reagan's career at Warner Brothers began with the small roles in B-movies, playing a charming, light-hearted characters rather than dramatic leads, often playing likable, light comedy characters. His early film career mirrored his radio work in tone and style, emphasizing sincerity and relatability rather than dramatic intensity. Reagan typically played the good guy, though not always the hero. Of the 53 films he made between 1937 and 1964, he played a villain only once. In Hollywood, Reagan appeared in more than 50 films, but his most memorable role was a King Crow, where he played a playboy who wakes up to find his legs amputated by a sadistic surgeon.
Randy! Where's the rest of me? Randy! Yes, Drake? It was that accident.
The directors liked him. He turned up on the tie, memorized his lines quickly, and got the job done. Hollywood, however, saw him primarily as an actor suited to leading roles in light comedies and B-action films. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Reagan, who had been a member of the US Army Cavalry Reserve since the 1930s, was called to active duty and promoted to second lieutenant. His served nearsightedness prevented him to form in combat. Instead of the battlefield, he was sent to the 1st Motion Picture Unit, where he made training films for the military. Reagan worked on film design to prepare soldiers for combat, including those on aerial gunnery and military tactics. The war strengthened Reagan's anti-communist stance and deepened his love of America. After the war, he wanted to escape what he called the monastery of the movies. He plunged into politics and became involved in the Screen Actor Guild. The SAG was a bourgeois union that represented a wide range of actors, from Hollywood's elite to obscure beat players. Always able to earn the trust of his peers, Reagan quickly worked his way up the ranks, serving twice as president. He enjoyed managing internal conflicts and navigating wider battles with studio heads as Hollywood reeled from bitter strikes and unsettling changes.
I had been on the board of directors of the Screen Actors Guild, and I came back from the service after 4 years in World War II and back to the board and discovered that something was going on in Hollywood.
During the Red Scare, Hollywood became a battleground in the fight against communist influence in American society. Reagan had been involved in left-wing organizations in the mid-1940s, which led the FBI to scrutinize him closely. His FBI file initially contained concerns about his political associations, but later prized his strong anti-communist stance. By the late 1940s, Reagan had become a vocal critic of communism and joined other Hollywood figures in exposing and ostracizing suspected communists. In 1947, Reagan testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was investigating communist influence in Hollywood. He also worked as an informant of the FBI using the codename T-10 and provided names of people he believed to be communists. Meanwhile, Reagan's film career, which still provided the bulk of his income, began to falter. Prosperity returned in 1954 when he became the host of CBS's weekly General Electric theater.
Good evening. I am Ronald Reagan speaking for General Electric.
Reagan soon became the public face of GE, regularly visiting the company's 135 plants across the country, where he spoke to both works and executives. Although he didn't run for office, he essentially spent 8 years campaigning, traveling, listening to people's concern, and developed his own ideas about how to address them. Using his wit and easy charm, Reagan honed his message and perfected his smooth speaking style. As a mature man disappointed in his own father, Ronald Reagan came to idealize President Franklin Delano Roosevelt with near filial devotion.
Franklin Roosevelt was the first president I ever voted for, the first to serve in my lifetime that I regarded as a hero, and the first I ever actually saw. That was in 1936. A campaign parade in Des Moines where I was working as a radio announcer.
Reagan was a staunch Democrat for the first half of his life, having been raised by Democratic parents in a predominantly Republican area. He was personally grateful to Roosevelt. Those New Deal programs had employed his father and brother during the depths of the Depression.
Well, there were no government programs at that time to take care of the people that suddenly were just destitute. My father, from managing a shoe store with a kind of work a partnership in the ownership, was out. The shoe store was gone. And this was happening in little towns like Dixon as well as in the great cities.
More broadly, he admired how Roosevelt restored hope and inspired the nation through his fireside chats, powerful speeches, bold programs, wit and warmth. So deep was Reagan's administration for Roosevelt that even after he became an ardent conservative and changed his registration to Republican, he continued to praise FDR. But he denounced the Democratic Party, big government, high taxes, the Great Society, and the bureaucracy created by the New Deal. Reagan's political views changed dramatically when he turned 50.
Having voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt 4 times, because I was a Democrat, my first vote at age 21 was cast for him. There's been some great changes, not in people, but in parties.
His political conversion was partly influenced by his changing economic status. In 1945, his agent secured him a multi-year $1 million contract, making Reagan financially comfortable for the first time in his life, at the time when marginal tax rates in the US were at their highest. Reagan resented paying high taxes. His clashes with left-wing union leaders as an official of the Screen Actor Guild, combined with his exposure to the growing belief that the federal government policies epitomized by the New Deal were stifling economic growth and individual freedom, further shaped his conservative views. In the 1960s election, Reagan was unimpressed with John Kennedy and joined the Democrats for Nixon movement. As he toured GA factories, he became increasingly critical of the Democratic Party and the welfare state. His increasingly conservative rhetoric unnerved his corporate bosses and led to the cancellation of his TV show in 1962. Reagan's rise in politics began with his televised speech, A Time for Choosing.
Federal employees number 2.5 million. And federal, state, and local, 1 out of 6 of the nation's workforce employed by government.
Delivered in support of Barry Goldwater's 1964 presidential campaign. The speech became a national sensation, sparking speculation that Reagan might be a stronger conservative candidate than Goldwater himself. Wealthy backers of Goldwater's campaign, including Henry Salvatore, shifted their focus to Reagan, seeing him as more articulate and appealing representative of their movement. In 1964, the Californian Republican Party was deeply divided, with moderates and conservative erodes. Party leaders believed that Reagan could be a unifying figure, appealing to both factions while maintaining core conservative principles. Reagan was not initially focused on California politics. His real ambition was national. The governorship was seen as a stepping stone to the presidency. A trial run run before a future bid for national office. Even before taking office, Reagan advisors were playing in his 1968 presidential campaign. Conservative business leaders in California saw Reagan as the ideal candidate to counter the liberal policies of the governor Pat Brown. Major donors and strategists break Reagan financially and logistically. These supporters believed that Reagan's anti-government rhetoric and outsider appeal could win over California voters frustrated by rising taxes and students' protests. In November 1966, Reagan won the governorship by nearly 1 million votes in a state where Democrats outnumbered Republicans almost 5-3. As governor, Ronald Reagan made a national name for himself by fighting the social and political revolution of the 1960s. He defended Americans' war in Vietnam, challenging the civil rights movement, and confronted radical students. His enduring popularity in a state that many other Americans blamed for sweeping such movements proves that Reagan shrewdly heard the silent majority amid the din of student protests. Reagan's 2 terms as governor of California thrilled conservatives, despite his occasional compromises. Inheriting a $200 million budget deficit, Reagan doubled corporate taxes while raising the personal tax rate from 7% to 11%. In his second term, he cemented his conservative credentials with staff welfare reform bill that reduced the welfare rolls by 300,000 in 3 years. His opposition to liberals of the 1960s defended his career. He was the conservative equivalent of the Kennedy, charismatic enough for the masses, ideological enough for the intellectuals. In 1968, the millionaires who bankrolled Reagan's gubernatorial campaign pushed for a presidential run, but it failed. In 1975, with Nixon in disgrace and for struggling, conservatives argued Reagan to run. Ronald Reagan suffered his first and only electoral defeat in 1976, but he took heart from how close he had come unseating an incumbent president. Reagan soon saw the nasty primary battle as an address rehearsal for 1980s, when the Republicans were poised to wrest the White House from the increasingly unpopular President Jimmy Carter.
We can have a more streamlined government without sacrificing those programs that meet the needs of the American people. We can finally bring federal spending under control. And we can, by doing that, finally bring the rate of inflation under control. We can turn this country around and we can turn our economy around. And the time to do it is now.
On 4th November 1980, the Republican former governor of California, Ronald Reagan, defeated the incumbent Democratic president, Jimmy Carter. Reagan's electoral college victory, 489-49, magnified his narrow popular vote majority of 50.7%, with Carter taking 41%, and independent candidate Josh Anderson gaining 6.6%. Reagan turned these inconclusive results into a mandate for change, as he declared in his inaugural address.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Rejecting the dominant assumptions of most American domestic policy signed the 1930s, notably Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, Reagan boldly called for a revolution, despite his narrow margin of victory in the popular vote. Ronald Reagan was a romantic American patriot. His political rise was fueled by a backlash against the counterculture radicalism and self-critiques in the 1960s, which had degenerated into defeatism and pessimism of the 1970s. Reagan revived Americans' traditional self-confidence and restored their optimism about the country's future. His red, white, and blue nationalism suited the television age. Moreover, rather than rejecting many of the key reforms of the 1960s, producing what can be called the Reagan reconciliation, Carter's performance was the divorce for an incumbent president seeking re-election since Herbert Hoover. This was largely because disappointment with Carter outweighed doubts about Reagan among undecided voters, who were largely opposed to the president. During Carter's administration, the economic crisis that had begun under Richard Nixon deepened. Carter's misery index, the combination of inflation and unemployment, nearly doubled in 4 years, rising from 12.5 to over 12. By September 1980, the annual inflation rate was 22.3%. In June 1979, Carter was less popular than either Lyndon Johnson or Gerald Ford had been at their respective laws. Only 33% of Americans approved of the president's performance. The 1979 hostage crisis and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan further undermined Carter's political standing. He was a president full of doubts, which did nothing to reassure the already crisis-weary American people. Carter's missteps set the stage for Reagan. Reagan's upbeat, optimistic conservatism contrasted with Carter's dourness and Barry Goldwater's rigid ideology. Using his Toastmaster skills, Reagan softened his harsh criticism with quick jokes. His wit disarmed the Democrats and revealed a more agile mind than most people realized. Reagan also cloaked his proposal in patriotic rhetoric, preferring a comforting, optimistic restoration.
But I think we also want a country that is strong enough at all times that we can say to any adventurous guys over there on the other side of the water, you better look twice, brother, before you start getting rough. That we can take care of ourselves.
Americans at the time did not see Reagan as a harbinger of new times or a revolutionary. Instead, they saw him as someone who was warm, friendly, and trustworthy. There was a real connection between him and the American people, and he seemed to really understand them. Reagan was the son of the Midwest, the embodiment of the American dream. His life was one of the classic American virtues, the very foundation of his politics. He admired American heroes and later became one himself.